Well, hi there and welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast. As always, we are so glad that you would join us today as we hear from such a wide range of Christian leaders when it comes to multiplication, church planting, trying new things, seeking to plant life-giving churches in different communities all around Australia. And as we also hear from leaders from around the globe. And today we are hearing from an Aussie. We are hearing from Pastor Andrew Scott, who along with his wife Beck have planted City Lights Church. They had their first official service coming out of the first lockdown in the north of Brisbane in 2020. And we love hearing from church planters. We know there's such amazing, incredible best practice and thought leadership out there, but it's also something really unique to actually hear from those who are in the trenches doing it. And so, Andrew, we are so glad that you would find the space to be with us today on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Charlie. And it's just an absolute privilege. I also just wanted to say about you, Charlie, like what you do with Exponential, your idea to encourage and inspire church planners. I felt that when I met with you, and the last time that we met, I left encouraged. So I just wanted to thank you for that and all the work that you are doing in this space.
Amazing. Well, that's a very encouraging way to start, Andrew. I'm already enjoying our time together. I wonder, for those who aren't familiar with you, who aren't from Queensland, part of the ACC churches in Queensland, I wonder if you just give a bit of a backdrop, bit of a thumbnail sketch of your journey of life and ministry up until now before we jump into talking about particularly your church plant.
Yeah, well, I definitely say my journey, my story is not particularly typical. So my parents are, my dad was a pastor, parents are missionaries, dad was a church planter. In fact, like one of my earliest memories is being in a lounge room, the church that my parents pioneered in Armidale, New South Wales. So I was there. I had a role. It was a volunteer role, right? Budgets were tight, so it wasn't paid. And I think I was like some form of entertainment. They started a church, this uni town in Armidale, and just like started it through prayer. They sold their house, gave the money to buy a couple of acres for the church, and the church is still going now. So that's part of my journey. From there, we're going to Brisbane. My parents are equipping for the mission field, and we head off to Bangkok, Thailand. So when I'm 9 to 15, I'm in Thailand. My dad plants a church over there, English service, Thai service. It's going really well, but some certain circumstances happen and we need to come back to Australia. And so around that time, I was 15, just kind of a normal 15-year-old, loved basketball. That was kind of the age of like Jordan, Pippen, Rodman, Chicago Bulls, right? So that was kind of like,
you've got the height for it as well, Andrew.
Yeah. I'm not saying I played like that, but that was like, I wish. But I remember there was a significant time my parents were in a prayer meeting in a high rise, and I was the only teenager there, the only kid there, and something was happening, and there was like a red rug, I can remember, and I got prayed for, and just like experienced the power and the presence of the Holy Spirit in a way, like fell under the power, like very genuine, very real. And that was the start of a season. My parents moved back to Sydney to a church that was in many ways the center of like the Toronto blessing, if you know about that kind of renewal movement.
Yeah.
And so my dad worked on team at that church. That church had like 250,000 visitors in the time that I was there, conferences. So as a teenager, I'm like experiencing the genuine power of God. It's motivating me to like read my Bible to like 2:00 at night. As a teenager, I'm doing like 40-day fasts and just seeking God. And so that was a very, very special time for me, very shaping time. And I would say that in a lot of ways, what I'm living out is part of what God did in my life at that time. So super involved in local church, super involved youth ministry. I felt a call to ministry, but I saw how difficult it was for how how difficult I thought it was. It's probably even more difficult than that, right? With my parents. And so like I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this, but I'm gonna go and study, I'm gonna work. And so I studied business and just got a degree in marketing and management. And then God gave me a huge amount of favor in the workplace. I was working for a couple of big American companies, got lots of promotions, and had my own office with a harbour view. At the same time, like really connected to local church as a volunteer. The first 6 years of our marriage, my wife and I, we went to like a tiny campus and we started a youth group from scratch. There was no youth kids in that church at all. So we started quite a rough area of Sydney. I don't know if you know the Cabramatta area at all. And so very diverse, probably one of the most ethnically diverse kind of suburbs council areas in Australia, right? So we just go, we go to a local park, kick a footy. That's how we saw people get saved, and that's how we started our youth ministry. Throughout this whole time, we had felt a call to Brisbane and to plant a church, but we were just kind of doing our best to serve in the local church, serve our pastors, leaders, and just kind of give ourselves to both to like doing a great job in our work and also to doing ministry as well. So,
wow, incredible. And so fast forward a couple of years, you guys have ended up in Brisbane. You've come to Brisbane. Tell us, the beginning of sensing the call to plant City Lights Church with your wife, Beck, and how did that come out? What was the run into that? Where did the inspiration, calling, equipping come from?
Yeah. Like at its earliest form, so my wife and I, coming up at the end of this year, we'll be celebrating 20 years of marriage. Amazing. So even before we got married, I remember like just saying, hey, I don't feel like I'm going to stay in Sydney. Are you okay with that? Because her family's there. And so we had this call, and we were in Sydney. We were part of a group of churches with a church planting vision. And we had said to our pastor in Sydney, we feel called to plant a church in Brisbane. So this is like maybe 16, 15 years ago, right? So and so we start making moves towards that, right? So I got a great job, like huge. I could go around the world with my company. I loved my job. I was good at it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the people I worked with, and had a career progression. But I was like, no, we're gonna make some steps, take some steps towards planting a church. So like I told them, the people, my employers, that became a little difficult for reasons I'll tell you. And we had the support of my pastor, and so we started making these steps, and like every door shut in our face. Like my pastor's like, you can talk to people. He's like, everyone said no. Like people in our church, do they want to go with you? Like all of them said no. The group of churches that we were with at that stage, like we wanted to plant in a certain area. They're like, no, we don't want you to plant in that area. That was quite discouraging, but obviously you under authority, you've got okay. And so we just got really, well, particularly myself, we got really discouraged. And then I thought, well, I'll just get a job in Brisbane. So I was like, final 2 interview, didn't get it. Flown to Melbourne for an interview for a job in Brisbane, flown to Brisbane, like qualified, didn't get it. I actually ended up getting a job with a big pharmaceutical company in the north of Brisbane. So they're like, okay, Friday, they're like, you've got the job, we'll send you the paperwork. Monday, they ring up and say, there's a global restructure and that role is no longer available. So I was pretty discouraged, right? And hopefully this might encourage somebody who is who has got this dream and they feel like it's not working out. And it was interesting because the dream, I didn't feel like the dream was selfish, and I didn't feel like it was self-promoting. I felt like it had a high cost attached to it. But I got to a point where I felt God say, if you push this, you will create an Ishmael, like you will create a child that's not of the promise.
Wow.
All right. So we got to a point where we surrendered that dream and said, God, look, we believe it's from you, but I totally give that to you. And from there, kind of miraculous door opened for me to come up and work at a large church, a couple of thousand people in Brisbane on full-time staff, which my wife and I did for 7.5 years. We knew it was from God. We knew God put us there. Like amazing training, amazing exposure to leading or overseeing most ministries in the life of that church. So we definitely but the dream to plant a church was dead. It was like, well, maybe God just did that to get us moving to go here. And after 7.5 years, we felt like our season was finished in that church. And so, but I was like, okay, I'm not going to make a new decision about what's next. I'm going to have a couple of months off. During that time, I took a day a week to pray and fast. And I was offered a job with another multi-campus church with a pastor that I really admire, and great church. And I literally got to the point of signing a contract. And through that time, God had rekindled that desire to plant a church. And so with Beck, I was like, okay, let's just do that. So we just did that. I don't think there's a lot of wisdom out there on how to plant a church. I started as a full-time volunteer. We didn't have any team, any finances. So we got kids in private Christian school. We got a mortgage. Wow. And we're just like, okay, we're just going to do this. We had a family laptop that I took down to a cafe, and then Beck's calling me at 2, and she's like, when are you going to be home? I want to use the laptop to do something. So that was the earliest days of the church plant. Yeah.
Andrew, I want to hear where you went from there, but before we get to that, I'm just really intrigued by when you felt like, even from your earliest age of 15, when you felt like the Lord
yeah.
But then, you fast forward a bit ahead and you feel like God has spoken a church into your heart at some point in time.
Yeah.
And even that idea of, an Ishmael rather than the promise.
Yeah.
I wonder, how would you encourage a potential listener today that's maybe thought about or sensed that the Lord may be stirring them at some point to plant a church, yet the patience that's required in order to not push that or strive towards that? I think here we know that the future church planters in Australia, the reality is some of them may be teenagers right now. Some of them may be
absolutely
youth ministry. What would you say to someone who's kind of starting to begin to feel that level of stirring towards that, but it may be another decade away?
Yeah. I think there's a scripture where Mary talks about, Mary heard the words and she treasured them in her heart. And so what I would just say is just keep that bubbling in your prayer life. I think you've got to be patient, and I think with God's work, and it's slightly ironic because the name of this podcast and then the name of what you do, but God works exponentially.
Yeah.
So we often think it's sequentially, and there certainly are steps that you take. But if your heart is open, if you are ready, if you allow God to, when it's His time, He breathes on things. And so I would just encourage, if you have that, just be open to that. I think that you can take steps, but you've got to kind of be in that spirit zone, in that prompting of the Spirit. Yeah.
And I love that in that you took, particularly as you were beginning to prepare for what the Lord was doing, you took a day a week to pray and to fast and to actually ascertain that this was a God and which is such a source of encouragement. I'd love to fast forward now to your dad in the cafe with your laptop. You're arguing over who's using the laptop today.
Yeah, that's right.
And I laugh because I've been there as well.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you just begin to share, what did planting City Lights Church look like practically from the get-go?
Yeah. I think, as I said, there's a lot of wisdom around church planting. And I would also say, if I'm really honest, that first year of planting the church, I don't think I led it particularly well. I think God was very faithful. It was actually in lockdown that God really spoke to me, and in a lot of ways I was a little bit had some stuff a little bit battered and bruised from a previous season, and so I had some stuff that God needed to really like get me going. But I would say that also we were just very open to the leading of the Spirit.
Yeah.
So like when God said, yes, do this, take this risk, talk to this person, we would do it. And so there's incredible like provision, there's incredible peace. So God was very faithful to us in that early stages. But having like the first time I've led a plant, when you like actually plant, it does feel very fragile. And so that first year, particularly, we were trying a bunch of stuff and gathering people. We were leading people to Jesus as well. And so like pretty organic that first year. And then when it came to like the COVID lockdown was actually really good for us and also for me, because it allowed, as God spoke to some things in my heart and also like restored and kind of renewed some stuff in me, that actually the COVID time allowed me time to reset a few things. And after that time is when we really started to grow. Yeah. From that COVID lockdown. Yeah.
One of the things that I so enjoyed about our previous connections prior to recording this podcast was just beginning to hear some of the makeup and values and priorities by which City Light the practice over the past couple of years. And I think it's no accident that as a missionary kid, as one who spent time overseas, you have thought very missiologically about the way that you're planting City Lights. Like you have quoted to me that there are as many as 50% of City Lights were either unchurched, de-churched, pre-Christian planting of the church.
Yeah.
Its core, that's what church planting is always meant to be. It's about the Great Commission. It's about making disciples.
Yeah. Like
Jesus, replicating, multiplying that, doing it again. I wonder if you'd kind of particularly be able to share, of course, there's no secret sauce out there, but you guys have been able to prioritize that and really invest time and efforts well into that. Could you speak to us just about how that's happened and some of what you've learned along the way?
Yeah. I would think like one of the biggest things that I would say is that it's one of my greatest passions. Like that is in me to see people come to faith and to be discipled. And so John Tyson, who you've got coming to a bit of a plug there for the upcoming conference.
For the conference.
Check it out. I've already registered. But he talks about I've heard him talk about, like, what would you burn for? Like, what would you give your life for? And I would I would happily give my life, like everything that I have, to see people come to faith in Jesus. And So I think, and very, like, that's very biblical, right? So the heart, the way it's defined and described, everything flows from the heart. So I think as we get God's heart to reach our city, a lot of that stuff is going to flow naturally. But yeah, like, we just have so many amazing stories. And probably the biggest thing that I've noticed when it comes to like reaching people, the big thing is that's it's just so releasing, is that reaching people is just about partnering with what God is already doing in people's lives, even for people that are far from God. Like, so one of the first people in our church was a guy. I had an appointment with a lawyer who was helping us with like our foundational documents. I'm a little bit early, and so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to like walk around this area. This is a suburb that we wanted to reach. I'm going to like walk around this area and I'm going to pray. So I see this guy on this park bench and I just go, hey, name's Andrew, looks like a normal guy, bank worker. And I just talk to him, just say, hey, how you going? And then I just like, we have like a 5-minute chat. And then I say, look, it's a little bit unusual, but like, do you want to grab a coffee? So like, I'm a church planner. I'm like, I don't have any buildings to manage or staff or team, right? So I'm like, do you want to have a coffee? Like, I didn't realize that at that moment, it's like one of the lowest moments in his life. So marriage is busted up, 4 young kids, like just on the surface looking good. And he's like, I was just sitting there having suicidal thoughts. Couldn't concentrate, couldn't sleep, couldn't work very well. But he said, which is like obviously a Holy Spirit thing, not an Andrew thing, but he's like, even that first time that we met, something just shifted.
Wow.
And so when I think about like the people that God has sent to us, I think about partnering with what God's doing. And then I just think in terms of like stewardship, which is obviously like, it's a pretty uniquely Christian word, right? But stewardship is like, can God trust me and our church with the people that he sends us, including people that are looking for Jesus? We got a 20-year-old in our church, just got baptized a couple of weeks ago. Amazing young man, never been to church. Turns up to church probably 10, 12 weeks ago, and just straight in, like, wow, reading the Bible. He's like, reading Alpha Bible Plan. He's like, that's not enough for me. He's like, in a connect group, on a team, in community, wow, like growing. So he comes to us, never been to a church, lives around the corner, but he has had an encounter with God in his house. He's been seeking God. He's got a friend at uni. So like that's the work of God, right? And we get to play a part in it.
Yeah.
And so another lady, she had been out of church for 10 years. She's got this emerging prophetic gift, learning how to be an intercessor in prayer. And so like when I think about that and like reaching the city, some people we've led to the Lord, some people God sent us, it's just so releasing just to say, okay, God, like, what are you doing and how can I be a part of it? Take so much pressure off me. I don't have to ride the roller coaster of a good week and a bad week. And like, what am I doing? Or like, I'm on top of the world, that kind of stuff. So I think that's part of it. Like the other thing I'd say is our church exists. One of the ways that I describe our church is a first generation church. So we exist to see people go from brokenness to wholeness in one generation. And so I think if that's in you, if that's what you're praying to, if that's what you're believing for, if that's your intent, then I think that as a result, there's a natural flow that's going to come out of that, rather than a striving. But I would probably say there's also like two practical things that anyone can hopefully benefit from is, one is that we're very intentional, like with our website, with the way that I preach and communicate, and other communicators do in the life of the church, is that we are communicating with the person who is unchurched or is new to faith in mind. The language we're using, if you look at our website, it's like, hey, if you're looking to explore faith, like this is the church for you. And then we're a super welcoming church. We're genuinely friendly, and that is a rare quality in society. So yeah.
That's great. That's amazing, Andrew. And I think even just those two testimonies that you just shared there are such an encouraging reminder of how important it is to plant churches. And it even leads me to kind of ask the question, because I know in some of our conversations, you've talked a lot about the importance of prayer. Obviously, you've alluded to it today. In you setting aside time to pray and to fast, prepare for what the Lord might do. And even like that idea of just simply joining with God, being responsive to the promptings of the Spirit is so integral to prayer. I wonder if, kind of as a way to begin to wrap up our time today, you might just be able to share particularly what, I guess, those rhythms of prayer. You've spoken about the likes of someone like John Tyson, just building a culture of prayer in the life of the church. That sounds definitely started to begin to happen at City Lights. Talk to us about prayer and presence and its importance, particularly in planting a church, but obviously in ongoing church ministry and leadership, the importance of prayer. Church planting. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think in our church, there are two environments that we want to build. One, and the way I describe them is tables and altars, right? Tables are places of authentic community, and altars are places where we can encounter the presence of God. So I think when we're leading, when I'm leading, when other leaders are leading, I'm leading people and I'm also leading environments. I want to create an environment of authentic community, and I want to create a place of encounter and devotion. Very biblical, right? So if you look in Hebrews, you've got Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. So there's a whole bunch of if you trace that through biblically, it's fascinating. So I think we're at the very early stages of creating prayer culture. Let me say something for church planters. Prayer is essential because God will map out, prayer and presence will lead you in your specific plan for planting your church. I'm so grateful. There's so much wisdom, knowledge around church planting, around leadership. You get to a point where it's okay, God, how do you want me to lead these people? How do you want me to, and you can't do that without prayer and the presence of God. A big emphasis for me, and one of my big passions, is that prayer must live in the home. So prayer, I love prayer meetings, but I believe that one of the healthiest things that a church can do is encourage and help people to have prayer live in our homes as a starting time. And so I would say we've got a way to go. Where we hope to go in the future, associated with venue, is more kind of those prayer rooms, places of the presence of God. But I'm so grateful for the leading of the Spirit and what He's done so far. So
it's incredible. I love that. And I get the sense that, particularly at City Lights, you're trying to help people practice these things first, and then when we come together, when the church is gathered, that's where we celebrate. That's where we send out again. That's where we're
absolutely.
Church. Yeah,
absolutely. One real quick story. So I got a guy in my Connect group, amazing guy. He's a builder. I think he's in his late 50s, and he said to me, he's been in church pretty much his whole life. He said, this is the first time I've ever fasted. Wow. As part of my prayer. And so those practices of prayer and fasting. And so, as I said, we're at the beginning of that journey. But it is exciting to see, like, one of the things that just makes my heart so alive is to see the level of transformation just through simple things like community, the presence of God, prayer, just in simple ways that anybody can do in any church. But just to see how people's lives are changed, families are being restored, it's amazing.
Well, Andrew, I'm absolutely so delighted to have heard your story today, and particularly what God is doing at work at City Lights and has been doing in and through you, Beck, for many, many, many years leading you up to this point. And so thanks so much for being with us today, for sharing your story, and we're cheering you on and can't wait to be with you as well in October when we're together for our national conference.
Thank you so much, mate. Really appreciate everything you do.